The chamber was vast and circular, with seats arranged in tiers that spiraled upward toward a domed ceiling. Representatives from 43 species sat in those seats, their varied forms creating a strange tapestry of galactic life. Some breathed oxygen, others methane. Some had scales, others had fur or skin or crystalline shells. At the center of it all stood Counselor Thexlar, his forearms spread wide in a gesture meant to command attention. Ambassador Min-Jun Park sat in the human delegation seat, which was positioned in the third tier. Not the highest tier where the founding species sat, but not the lowest either. A middle position for a middle species, or so the council seemed to believe. He wore a simple gray suit and kept his expression neutral as Thexalar's voice boomed through the translation devices everyone wore. "The motion passes," Thexlar announced. "Resource allocation will be restructured. The sectors currently managed by human oversight will be transferred to species with greater experience in these matters." Min-Jun felt his assistant, So-Yun, stiffen beside him. She was young, only 30 years old, and still believed that fairness mattered in these chambers. He gently touched her arm, a quiet signal to remain calm. The Draknari delegation clicked their mandibles in approval. The Zenthari representatives flashed their bioluminescent agreement. The Koltarans rumbled with satisfaction. All of them were pleased. None of them asked what the humans thought. Min-Jun pressed his voting button. Abstain. Not yes, not no. Just abstain. It was noticed by no one. "This restructuring will allow for more efficient management," Thexalar continued. "The neutral zone monitoring stations will transfer to Draknari Authority. Refugee processing centers will fall under Zenthari administration. The medical research outposts in the Outer Rim will become Koltaran responsibility." So-Yun leaned close to Min-Jun. "Sir, those are our posts. We've run them for decades." 80 years, Min-Jun whispered back. "We've run them for 80 years. And they're just taking them?" Min-Jun said nothing. There was nothing to say that would change anything in this chamber. The session continued for another hour. Other matters were discussed, other votes taken. When the council finally adjourned, Min-Jun stood slowly. His knees ached. He was 63 years old and had served as ambassador for 12 years. Before that, he had been a mediator in the neutral zones. Before that, a teacher on a colony world. He had given his entire adult life to the dream of humans finding their place among the stars. As he walked toward the exit, Thexalar approached him. The Zenthari was twice Min-Jun's height, with skin that shimmered like oil on water. "Ambassador Park, I trust there are no concerns with the transition?" Min-Jun looked up at him. "No concerns, Counselor. We will cooperate fully with the transfer of authority." "Excellent. I knew humans would be reasonable about this." Thexalar's translator made his tone sound warm, almost condescending. "After all, these are minor positions. Administrative work, really. Your people will be free to pursue more suitable endeavors." "Of course," Min-Jun said. Thexalar walked away, already in conversation with a Draknari captain about military matters. "More important matters," his posture suggested. So-Yun waited until they were in the corridor outside. "Sir, we can't just let them—" "We can, and we will." Min-Jun kept walking. "Schedule an emergency conference with all human sector chiefs. I want everyone available within 6 hours." "What are you planning?" "Something we should have done a long time ago." The conference took place in a secure channel that connected 40 human outposts across the galaxy. Min-Jun looked at the screens showing faces he had worked with for years. Dr. Hana Choi, who ran the Medical Research Network. Engineer Jae-Sung Kim, who maintained the infrastructure nobody else wanted to fix. Captain Seo-Yun Lee, who commanded the peacekeeping forces in the neutral zones. Teachers, scientists, mediators, aid workers. The people who did the work that kept the galaxy running. "You've all seen the Council's decision," Min Jun began. "They're reassigning our sectors to other species. They believe we're not needed." "That's insane," Hana said. Her hair was gray now, tied back in a practical bun. She looked exhausted. "We're the only ones running functional disease response networks. The Kolterons don't even understand cross-species epidemiology." "The Draknari think peacekeeping means armed occupation," Captain Lee added. "They don't mediate. They dominate." "I know," Min Jun said quietly. "I know all of this. So what do we do? Fight the decision?" Jae Sung asked. "No." Min Jun took a breath. "We leave." Silence filled the channel. "We leave peacefully," Min Jun continued. "We pack our equipment, transfer our codes and keys, and withdraw from all council positions. No protests, no demands, no threats. We simply step back and let them see what happens." "They'll fall apart," Hana said. "Perhaps. Or perhaps they'll manage just fine without us, and we'll discover we were never as important as we thought." Min Jun's voice was steady. "Either way, we'll know the truth, and so will they." The vote was unanimous. Over the next 48 hours, humans across the galaxy began the quiet work of departure. They packed their belongings, they backed up their files, they wrote detailed transfer documents that explained their systems and procedures. Everything was done professionally, courteously, without any hint of anger or resentment. Captain Lee gave her counterpart, a Draknari warrior named Kresh, a complete briefing on the neutral zone stations. She explained the meditation protocols, the de-escalation techniques, the careful balance of showing strength without threatening anyone. Kresh listened impatiently, his claws tapping on the table. Dr. Choi handed over her research notes to the Kolteron science team. She explained the disease monitoring systems, the early warning networks, the volunteer coordination that kept supplies moving to outbreak zones. The Kolterons nodded but seemed more interested in the advanced medical equipment than the networks of relationships Hana had built. Jae Sung showed the Zenthari engineers the infrastructure maintenance schedules. He pointed out the systems that needed daily attention, the bugs that required manual fixes, the careful timing required to keep everything running. The Zenthari assured him that their automated systems would handle everything much more efficiently. On the final day, Min Jun returned to the council chambers one last time. He carried a single datapad. He approached the central podium where Thexlar was reviewing documents. "Counselor, I'm submitting humanity's formal withdrawal from all council administrative positions." Min Jun handed him the pad. "All transfers are complete. We wish you success in your future endeavors." Thexlar barely looked up. Yes. Thank you, Ambassador. Very professional of you." Min Jun walked out of the chambers. So-Yun was waiting by the transport terminal. "Is it done?" she asked. "It's done. How do you feel?" Min Jun looked back at the massive council building, its spires reaching toward the stars. "Tired," he said, "and ready to go home." They boarded the transport to Earth. Behind them, the galaxy continued its business. The council moved on to other matters. New administrators took over the posts humans had vacated. Life went on. Nobody noticed the silence where humanity used to be. Not yet. 48 hours after the last human transport left council space, the first cracks appeared. Neutral Zone Station. 7 hung in the darkness between Draknari and Valorian territories, a wheel of metal and light spinning slowly in the void. For 60 years, it had been a place of peace. For 60 years, human peacekeepers had maintained order there. Now, Commander Kresh stood in the control center, surrounded by his warriors, and wondered why everything felt wrong. "Sir, another dispute in Docking Bay 3, one of his soldiers reported. 2 merchant captains arguing over berth priority. "Send a squad. Have them establish order," Kresh ordered. 10 minutes later, weapons fire echoed through the bay. Both merchant captains were dead. Their crews were now demanding justice, and 3 more ships were threatening to open fire if they didn't get it. Kresh stared at the tactical display in confusion. The previous human commander, Captain Lee, had given him all the protocols. He had followed them. Send forces, establish order. Why had it escalated to violence? He pulled up the recorded briefing from Captain Lee. Her image appeared on the screen, and he listened again to her words. The key is de-escalation. Talk to them first. Listen to both sides. Most disputes aren't about what they seem to be about. That merchant arguing about docking priority is really worried about meeting a delivery deadline because his family is sick and he needs the payment. The other merchant is actually scared because pirates hit this sector last week. If you understand what they're really fighting about, you can help them solve it. Kresh paused the recording. Talk first? Listen? These seemed like weak strategies. Draknari were warriors. They established order through strength. But as he looked at the tactical display showing 3 more disputes escalating across the station, he began to wonder if strength alone was enough. 3,000 light-years away, Refugee Processing Center Alpha orbited a small moon. The center processed an average of 2,000 refugees per day, people fleeing wars, natural disasters, or economic collapse. They came from dozens of species speaking hundreds of languages, carrying nothing but hope. Administrator Vexithar had been confident when he took over from the human staff. The Zenthari were known for their efficiency, their love of systems and order. He had improved the processing algorithms within hours of arrival. Everything would run faster now, smoother. Then, at hour 6, the main computer system crashed. What happened? Vexithar demanded. His technician looked confused. Unknown error, sir. The system just stopped. Restart it. The technician did. The system ran for 6 hours, then crashed again. Vexithar reviewed the logs, searching for the problem. There was nothing in the human handover documents about this. No mention of any recurring error. He contacted the human administrator who had previously run the center, a woman named Jin Soo Park. Did you experience system crashes? He asked. Every 6 hours, Jin Soo replied from Earth. She looked tired but patient. Why didn't you document this? It wasn't in the official documentation because it was a hardware issue, not software. The cooling system for the main processor has a flaw. Every 6 hours, it overheats slightly and triggers a safety shutdown. We tried to get it replaced, but the council said it wasn't a priority, so we just restarted it every 5.5 hours. For how long? 3 years. Vexthar stared at his screen. You manually restarted a critical system every 5.5 hours for 3 years. Someone had to. The refugees needed the center operational. But that means someone had to be awake and monitoring every 5.5 hours, day and night, for 3 years. Yes, we worked in shifts. Vexthar disconnected the call. He looked at his staff of 7. He would need at least 3 people working around the clock just to keep one system running. And as he reviewed the other systems, he began finding more such issues. Small problems that the humans had simply handled day after day, year after year, without complaint or recognition. On a medical research outpost on the edge of charted space, Dr. Hana Choi's replacement discovered another truth about human operations. The call came from a small colony on Paraxis 4. There was an outbreak of Talaran fever, a disease that could kill within days if left untreated. The colony administrator was frantic. We need medical aid immediately. Our doctor died in the first wave of infection. The new administrator, a Colteran named Drolix, checked the colony's account balance. Your colony has insufficient funds for an emergency medical deployment. The cost is... We can't pay. That's why we're calling. Please, children are dying. Drolix felt uncomfortable but followed protocol. I'm sorry, but council regulation requires payment before deployment for non-member colonies. If you can arrange financing... The transmission ended. The colony administrator had cut the connection. Drolix sat in his office feeling strange. He accessed the records from Dr. Choi's administration. In her 5 years running the outpost, she had responded to 47 emergency calls from colonies that couldn't pay. She had deployed medical teams at the outpost's expense using discretionary funds that technically weren't supposed to be used that way. She had never asked permission. She had just sent help. Drolix contacted his supervisor. "Sir, I have a question about emergency response protocols." "What is it? What do we do when a colony can't pay but people are dying?" There was a long pause. "Follow standard protocol. No payment, no deployment." "But the humans used to." "The humans were inefficient. We follow proper procedures." Drolix closed the connection. He looked at his medical supplies, sitting ready in storage. He thought about children dying on Paraxis 4. He thought about how Dr. Choi must have felt, sending help without permission, 47 times. He wondered if efficiency was really the same thing as doing the right thing. On a major trade route between Zenthari and Koltaran space, Merchant Captain Vrix was having the worst week of his career. He had been transporting goods along this route for 15 years, and there had always been disputes, pirates, accidents, arguments over right-of-way. But there had also always been human mediators at the way station. Now the way station was dark, the humans were gone, and the small disputes were becoming major incidents. 2 days ago, a Zenthari cargo ship and a Draknari military transport had nearly collided. Both sides blamed each other. The argument had turned into a standoff, with both ships refusing to move. Without a neutral mediator, the dispute was now in its second day, and 20 other ships were backed up behind them, unable to pass. Vrix tried contacting both captains, offering to mediate, but neither side trusted him. He was Koltaran, and both the Zenthari and Draknari suspected his species of taking sides. He remembered the human mediator who used to work the route, a man named Dong Hyun. Vrix had never thought much about what Dong Hyun did. He had just been there, quietly resolving disputes, keeping traffic moving. Now that he was gone, Vrix understood what he had been doing. He had been trusted by everyone. The humans had no major military, no economic power to rival the great species, no territorial ambitions. They were neutral, not because they claimed to be, but because they genuinely were. And now they were gone. Back in the council chambers, Councillor Thexelar was beginning to notice the reports. At first, they had seemed like isolated incidents. An outbreak here, a trade dispute there, some violence at a station, normal problems that happened in a galaxy of trillions. But the reports kept coming. And they were all coming from the sectors the humans had just vacated. He pulled up the data, reviewing the past 48 hours. 17 major incidents, 43 minor ones, economic disruptions, medical emergencies, diplomatic problems, all in sectors that had been peaceful and functional for decades. Thexelar told himself it was just an adjustment period. The new administrators were still learning their positions. Everything would stabilize soon. It had to. But as his communication system alerted him to yet another urgent message, he felt something he hadn't felt in many years. Doubt. 1 week after humanity's departure, the problems stopped being isolated incidents and became a cascade. The refugee crisis hit first and hardest. Across 17 processing centers, the systems that humans had carefully maintained began to fail. Not because of sabotage or negligence, but because those systems had required constant attention that no one else was willing or able to provide. At Processing Center Alpha, Administrator Vexithar stood in the main hall and watched chaos unfold. 3,000 refugees were packed into a space designed for 500. The queue management system had failed. The translation services were offline. The food distribution network had collapsed because it relied on a volunteer coordination system that the humans had run from their personal devices. A fight broke out between 2 groups of refugees. Vexthar called security, but the security team didn't know how to handle it. The humans had trained in de-escalation and cultural sensitivity. The Zenthari security force knew how to stop violence, but not how to prevent it from starting again. A child was crying, separated from her parents in the crowd. Vexathar picked her up, trying to comfort her, but she didn't speak his language, and he didn't speak hers. He remembered the human staff, how they had all learned at least basic phrases in 20 different languages. He had thought that was inefficient. Now he understood it was necessary. He set the child down gently and made his way to his office. He composed a message to the council. Subject: urgent, humanitarian crisis developing. He was the 14th administrator to send such a message that day. On Earth, Dr. Hana Choi sat in her small apartment in Seoul and watched her communication device light up with incoming calls. Former colleagues. Scientists from other species. Medical directors from colonies across the galaxy, all of them asking for help. The outbreak on Paraxis 4 had spread to 3 neighboring systems. 47 people were dead. The Koltaran Medical Administration had finally sent help, but they had arrived too late and without the cultural knowledge needed to work effectively with the local population. Hana didn't answer the calls. She wanted to. Every instinct told her to pick up the device and help coordinate a response. But she had spent 35 years doing exactly that, and the council had decided her work wasn't valuable enough to keep. Her grandson, Minho, brought her tea. He was 12 years old and studying to be a translator. "Grandma, why don't you help them?" he asked. "Because they need to understand what we were doing," Hana said quietly. "If I fix it now, they'll never learn." "But people are dying." "Yes, and that's terrible. But people were always dying, Minho. We were saving them day after day, year after year. Nobody noticed because we made it look easy." She sipped her tea. "Sometimes the only way to make people see you is to step back and let them see what the world looks like without you." Across the galaxy, other human systems were collapsing. The orphan programs that had placed children from war-torn worlds with adoptive families had completely shut down. The humans had been running them because they were the only species comfortable with the idea of cross-species adoption. Other species found it strange or uncomfortable to raise a child from a different genetic line. Hundreds of orphaned children were now stuck in temporary facilities with no clear future. Some had been days away from placement with loving families. Now they waited in institutional care while administrators tried to figure out what to do with them. The scientific collaboration networks had ground to a halt. It turned out that humans had been serving a critical role that nobody had named or recognized. They had been translators, but not of language. They had translated concepts between species with fundamentally different ways of thinking. The Zenthari thought in systems and logic. The Draknari thought in hierarchies and honor. The Koltarans thought in cycles and balance. The humans had been the ones who could understand all these perspectives and help them communicate with each other. Without humans to bridge the gaps, the scientists couldn't work together effectively. A major research project into faster-than-light communication stalled completely. The team sat in meetings where everyone agreed on the goal but couldn't agree on the approach. After 3 days of circular arguments, the project was suspended indefinitely. But the crisis that finally got the Council's full attention was economic. It started in the frontier sectors, the edge of charted space where small colonies struggled to survive. These colonies had relied on a network of microloans and economic support that humans had been providing. The humans hadn't been doing it officially. They had been doing it through private organizations, investment cooperatives, and individual acts of faith in colonists that bigger economic powers considered too risky. Without that support, dozens of colonies began to fail. When a colony fails, people have to evacuate. But evacuation costs money. And the insurance companies that would normally cover such evacuations were now refusing to issue policies. It turned out that humans had been underwriting most of the high-risk insurance in the galaxy. They had been the ones willing to bet on long shots, to ensure rescue missions and humanitarian convoys that other species considered too dangerous or unprofitable. Without human underwriting, the insurance market for frontier operations collapsed. Aid organizations couldn't get coverage, rescue ships couldn't get coverage, even some military operations couldn't get coverage. Within a week, the economic disruption had spread from the frontier to the core systems. Trade was slowing. Investments were freezing. The carefully balanced galactic economy was beginning to seize up, and nobody understood why until they traced it back to the absence of human economic activity. Councillor Thexelar stood in the emergency session of the council, his forearms trembling slightly as he addressed the assembly. He had not slept in 2 days. "The situation is deteriorating faster than we anticipated," he said. "We have humanitarian crises in 17 sectors, medical emergencies in 43 systems, economic disruption that could trigger a recession if not addressed immediately." "This is absurd," a Draknari representative growled. "The humans were a minor species. How can their absence cause this much chaos?" "That is precisely the question we must answer," Thexelar said. He pulled up a display that showed the galaxy before and after human departure. "I have been reviewing the records. The humans were officially responsible for what we classified as low-priority operations: refugee processing, minor dispute mediation, small-scale medical outreach, cultural exchange programs." "Yes, exactly. Low priority." But these operations were not isolated. Thexelar expanded the display, showing connection lines spreading across the galaxy. They were foundational. The refugee processing centers prevented humanitarian crises from developing. The dispute mediation prevented small conflicts from becoming wars. The medical outreach prevented small outbreaks from becoming pandemics. The cultural exchanges built the relationships that made cooperation possible. He looked around the chamber. "We called these things low priority because they were quiet. Because they didn't involve military glory or technological advancement, because they happened every day without drama or recognition. But it turns out that civilization doesn't run on glory and advancement alone. It runs on the quiet work of keeping people alive, keeping them talking, keeping them connected." "So what do we do?" the Kulturan representative asked. "We need the humans back." The chamber erupted in protest. "We can't just ask them back. We voted to remove them." "Then we admit we were wrong," Thexelar said quietly. The silence that followed was profound. Admitting error was not something the council did easily. These were proud species, ancient civilizations, great powers. To admit they had been wrong about the humans, that they had underestimated and undervalued them, was almost unthinkable. "There must be another way," someone said. Thexelar accessed his terminal and pulled up the human departure documents. He had finally read them all, every report and briefing that humans had filed over 80 years. He had spent the last day reading, and the more he read, the more horrified he became. "Do you know how many volunteer hours humans contributed to galactic operations?" he asked the chamber. 17 million hours per year. Do you know how many disputes they mediated? Over 10,000 annually. How many lives saved by their medical operations? We stopped counting at 100 million. He looked at the assembled representatives. For 80 years, humans have been holding this civilization together with their quiet competence and their inexplicable willingness to care about people they've never met. We didn't notice because they made it look effortless. But it wasn't. They were just too dignified to complain. He closed the display. And now they're gone. And we're seeing for the first time what the galaxy looks like without them. "Will they come back if we ask?" someone finally asked. "I don't know," Thexelar admitted, "but we need to try." 2 weeks after humanity's departure, the full price of their absence became clear in ways that numbers and reports could not capture. On the border between Draknari and Valorian space, two battle fleets faced each other across an empty zone that had been peaceful for 60 years. The dispute had started over mining rights to an asteroid field. It was a minor disagreement, the kind that happened frequently in a galaxy where resources were precious and borders were complicated. But without human mediators, the minor disagreement had escalated. The Draknari saw the Valorian claim as an insult to their honor. The Valorians saw the Draknari response as aggressive posturing. Both sides called up military forces. Both sides issued ultimatums. Both sides prepared for war. Councillor Thexelar watched the situation from the council chambers, feeling helpless. He tried to contact both sides, offering to mediate, but they rejected him. The Zenthari, they said, had their own territorial interests and couldn't be trusted. When he suggested that the Koltarans mediate, both sides rejected that too. "We want the humans," the Draknari commander finally said. "We trust the humans." "The humans are not available," Thexelar replied. "Then we will settle this with weapons." The situation hung on the edge of violence, and Thexelar had no tools to pull it back. On Station 47, in what had been a thriving hub of cross-species interaction, a child died. Her name was Lyri, and she was 7 years old. She was Naxian, a species with complex medical needs that required specialized care. Her family had been refugees, processed through one of the human-run centers 3 years ago. The humans had connected them with a medical charity that provided free ongoing care for children with chronic conditions. When the humans left, the charity's operations had been transferred to a Zenthari medical corporation. The corporation had reviewed its cases and made a business decision. Lyri's family couldn't afford the specialized treatments she needed. The cost-benefit analysis showed that continuing her care was not financially viable. They had sent a formal notice to the family. Treatment would be discontinued in 30 days unless payment could be arranged. The family had tried desperately to raise the money, but they were refugees with no resources. They had sent messages to the council, to advocacy groups, to anyone who might help. Lyri died on day 28. The story spread across the galactic network within hours. It wasn't the death itself that captured attention. People died every day across billions of worlds. It was the contrast. For 3 years, a human medical charity had kept this child alive, asking nothing in return. 2 weeks after the humans left, she was dead because helping her wasn't profitable. The outrage was immediate and widespread. Protests erupted on dozens of worlds. Citizens of every species gathered in public spaces, holding signs that said, "Where are the humans?" And we took them for granted. A Koltaran musician wrote a song called "The Quiet Ones" that became the most downloaded piece of media in council space within 48 hours. The lyrics spoke of humans as the unnoticed caretakers, the ones who held the galaxy together while everyone else pursued glory. In the council chambers, the representatives could no longer ignore what was happening. The public was turning against them, demanding answers, demanding that the humans be brought back. But the deeper crisis was still unfolding in the frontier sectors. 12 colonies had now completely failed, their populations evacuated to overcrowded refugee centers. 20 more were on the brink of failure. The economic contagion was spreading, and financial analysts were predicting a full recession within months. The problem was psychological as much as economic. The humans had been the ones who invested in long shots, who believed in struggling colonies, who provided support when no one else would. Their absence wasn't just a gap in funding, it was a gap in faith. Without the humans to believe in them, the colonists were losing hope. Captain Seo Yun Lee watched all of this unfold from her home on Earth. She lived in a small house in Busan overlooking the ocean. She had retired from peacekeeping after 28 years of service. She had mediated thousands of disputes, prevented countless conflicts from turning violent, and saved lives in ways that were never counted or recorded. Her former second-in-command, a Valorian named Thexan, had been sending her messages every day. The situation at Neutral Zone Station 7 was getting worse. The Draknari peacekeepers didn't understand what they were doing wrong. They tried to establish order, but violence kept escalating. Thexon was begging Seo Yun to return, to teach them what she knew. Seo Yun didn't reply to the messages. She sat on her porch, drank tea, and watched the waves. Her husband, Ji Woo, sat beside her. "You want to go back?" he said. It wasn't a question. "Of course I do. People are dying, Ji Woo. People I could save. But if I go back now, nothing changes. They'll be grateful for a few weeks, then they'll forget again. They'll take us for granted again. They need to feel the full weight of our absence. They need to understand that kindness and care aren't weaknesses or hobbies. They're the foundation everything else is built on." Jiwoo nodded. He had been a counselor for trauma victims from a dozen different species. He understood the psychology of loss and recognition. "How long?" "Until they truly understand what we were doing. Until they ask us back, not because they need us to solve their problems, but because they value us as equals." On the galactic news networks, the coverage was relentless. Every major outlet was running stories about humanity's absence. Journalists were reviewing decades of footage, pulling up old stories that had barely been noticed at the time. A human aid worker helping rebuild after a disaster. A human teacher working with traumatized war orphans. A human engineer fixing a life support system on a station that couldn't afford proper repairs. The stories had always been there, but no one had paid attention. Humans helping people was just normal, just expected. It was background noise in a galaxy focused on more dramatic events. Now that the helping had stopped, everyone noticed the silence. A Draknari veteran went on a popular talk show and spoke about the human counselor who had helped him recover from post-traumatic stress after a brutal campaign. "She spent 6 months working with me," he said, his voice cracking. "My own species thought I was weak for needing help. She thought I was brave for accepting it. She saved my life, and I never even thanked her." A Zenthari scientist published an essay about the human researcher who had helped her translate her work into terms that other species could understand. "I won the Council Prize for my discoveries," she wrote. "But I couldn't have done it without my human colleague. She was never mentioned in the award citation. I didn't even think to include her. I'm ashamed of that now." The stories kept coming. Thousands of them. Then millions. Every person across the galaxy, it seemed, had a memory of a human who had helped them. A human who had been patient when they were struggling. A human who had listened when no one else would. A human who had cared about them for no reason, except that they were a person who needed help. Counselor Thexlar read every story. He sat in his office day after day, reading the testimonials that flooded in. Each one was a small indictment, a gentle accusation. "We had them," the stories said. "We had these people who cared about us, and we ignored them." He tried to contact Ambassador Minjun Park on Earth. The communication went through, but Minjun declined to speak with him. Instead, Minjun sent a brief text message. "The Council voted to remove us from our responsibilities. We have complied with that decision. We have nothing further to discuss." Thexlar tried 3 more times over the next week. Each time, the response was the same. Polite, professional, and utterly final. Finally, Thexlar called an emergency session of the full council. Every representative was required to attend. The chamber was full for the first time in years. "We must formally request humanity's return," Thexlar announced. "Not as subordinates, not as administrators of low-priority sectors, as essential partners, as equals." "That's a significant shift in policy," the Koltaran representative said carefully. "Yes, and it's necessary. We were wrong about the humans, catastrophically wrong. We saw their work as simple because they made it look simple. We saw their care as weakness because we didn't understand it was strength. We need them back, and we need to admit publicly why we need them back. They might refuse, someone pointed out. They have every right to refuse, Thexelar agreed. We dismissed them. We undervalued them. We took 8 decades of service for granted. If they tell us to face the consequences of our choices, I could not blame them. He looked around the chamber. But we have to try. And we have to mean it. This cannot be a temporary fix. If the humans return, it must be as full partners in galactic civilization. Their methods must be valued. Their work must be recognized. The quiet strength they represent must be honored. The vote was unanimous. The Council would formally request humanity's return. 4 weeks after humanity's departure, Ambassador Min-Jun Park received a formal communication from the Galactic Council. He read it in his apartment in Seoul, where morning light was streaming through the windows and the smell of fresh coffee filled the air. The message was not what he had expected. He had anticipated demands, perhaps accusations of abandonment, maybe appeals to duty or responsibility. Instead, the message was simple and direct. It was an apology. The Council acknowledged their error in undervaluing human contributions. They recognized the critical nature of the work humans had been doing. They formally requested humanity's return to Council operations, with full partnership status and a seat on the High Council itself. Min-Jun read the message 3 times. Then he made a call. Within 24 hours, a delegation of human representatives had assembled. Dr. Hana Choi arrived from Seoul. Captain Seo-Yun Lee came from Busan. Engineer Jae Sung Kim flew in from New Tokyo. Teachers, scientists, aid workers, mediators. 50 people who represented the different sectors of human contribution to galactic civilization. They met in a conference room and reviewed the Council's offer. The debate was intense. Some wanted to reject it outright. Some wanted to demand more concessions. Some wanted to return immediately because people were suffering. Min-Jun listened to all of it before speaking. The question isn't what we demand, he said quietly. The question is what we want to achieve. Do we want revenge? Do we want recognition? Or do we want to build something better? I want them to understand what they did to us, a young diplomat said. I want them to know what it felt like to be invisible. They know now, Hana said gently. The whole galaxy knows. That was the point of leaving. So we go back? We go back, Min-Jun said. But we go back on our terms, and our terms aren't about power or pride. They're about changing how this civilization thinks about strength and service. He outlined a proposal. Humans would return to their positions, but the Council would need to agree to fundamental changes. Human methods of conflict resolution would become standard training for all peacekeepers. Funding for humanitarian operations would be recognized as critical infrastructure, not discretionary spending. Other species would be trained in the care work that humans had been doing, so that the burden wouldn't fall entirely on one species again. Most importantly, emotional intelligence and care for others would be formally recognized as valuable skills, not weaknesses to be overlooked. We're not asking them to become like us, Min-Jun said. We're asking them to value what we bring, to understand that a civilization needs both strength and compassion, both logic and empathy, both glory and service. The delegation agreed. Min-Jun composed a response to the Council, outlining their terms. He sent it knowing it might be rejected. These were proud species being asked to fundamentally change their culture. But the response came back within 6 hours. The Council accepted all terms. 3 days later, Ambassador Min-Jun Park stood once again in the Council chambers. But this time, he stood on the floor of the High Council itself, not in the observer tiers. A seat had been created for humanity, equal to the seats of the founding species. Councillor Thexelar approached him before the session began. The Zenthari looked older somehow, more worn. Ambassador Park, I want to apologize personally, not as council speaker, but as an individual. I dismissed you. I dismissed your people. I was arrogant and blind. Min-jun studied him for a moment. I accept your apology, counselor. But I need you to understand something. We didn't leave because we were angry. We were just tired of being unseen, tired of working ourselves to exhaustion for people who thought our work didn't matter. We needed you to see us. We see you now. The entire galaxy sees you now. Good. Because we're not coming back to be invisible servants again. We're coming back as partners. I understand, and I am grateful. The session began. The chamber was filled to capacity, with observers from every member species. This wasn't just a council meeting. It was a moment that would define the future of galactic civilization. Min-jun gave his speech. He spoke about the nature of strength, about how true civilization wasn't built on military might or technological advancement alone. He spoke about the quiet work that held societies together, the unglamorous service that made everything else possible. He spoke about compassion not as weakness, but as the foundation of cooperation. For 80 years, humans have served this council, he said. We mediated your disputes, housed your refugees, treated your sick, taught your children, and maintained the systems you didn't want to think about. We did this not because we were weak, but because we believed in what this council could be. We believed in a galaxy where different species could work together, could care for each other, could build something greater than any of us alone. He paused, looking around the chamber. You took us for granted. You thought our work was simple because we made it look easy. You thought our care was weakness because you didn't understand it. And when we left, you discovered what we knew all along. That kindness is not weakness, that empathy is not inefficiency, that the quiet work of caring for people is the most important work in the galaxy. The chamber was absolutely silent. We're coming back, Min-jun continued. But we're not coming back to be invisible anymore. We're coming back as partners, and we're asking you to join us, not to become like us, but to value what we represent. To understand that your strength and our compassion are not opposites. They're two parts of the same thing. They're civilization. When he finished, something unprecedented happened. The chamber erupted in applause. Not the polite acknowledgement that usually followed speeches, but genuine, sustained applause from species that rarely showed emotion publicly. Over the following weeks, the transformation began. Draknari warriors attended conflict resolution workshops taught by human peacekeepers. They learned about de-escalation, about listening, about understanding the underlying causes of conflict. It was difficult for them. Their culture had always valued strength and directness, but as they practiced the techniques, they began to see their effectiveness. Kresh, the commander who had struggled at Neutral Zone Station 7, spent 2 weeks training with Captain Seo-Yun Lee. He watched as she turned hostile situations into conversations, as she found common ground between parties who seemed to have nothing in common. On his final day of training, he approached her. I thought you were weak, he admitted. I thought your methods were soft, but I was wrong. This is the hardest thing I've ever learned. It requires more strength than fighting. Seo-Yun smiled. Fighting is easy, Commander. Understanding is hard. But understanding prevents more violence than any weapon. In the medical sectors, Dr. Hana Choi worked with Koltaran administrators to reform the healthcare system. They struggled with the idea of providing care to those who couldn't pay. It violated their sense of resource efficiency, but Hana showed them the numbers. Every person you save becomes a contributor to society, she explained. Every child you educate becomes someone who can solve problems. When you invest in people, especially people others have given up on, you're not being inefficient. You're building the future. The Koltarans studied her data. Slowly, they began to understand. The human approach wasn't illogical. It was based on a longer time horizon, on faith in potential rather than current value. Across the galaxy, similar transformations were happening. Xanthari administrators learning to value the personal touch in refugee processing. Valorian traders learning the human art of win-win negotiation. Species that had never thought about emotional labor beginning to understand its importance. It wasn't easy. Cultural change never is. There were setbacks and frustrations. Some individuals resisted the changes, clinging to old assumptions about what strength meant and what mattered in civilization. But something fundamental had shifted. The galaxy had seen what happened when the quiet work stopped. They had felt the absence of those who cared, and they couldn't unsee it. 6 months after their return, Minjun stood again in the council chambers. The meeting was routine, a discussion of trade policy, but after the session ended, he was approached by a young Xanthari diplomat. "Ambassador Park, I wanted to thank you," she said. "My mother was a refugee. She was processed through a human-run center 30 years ago. I never knew what that meant until recently. I never understood that someone cared enough to help her when she had nothing. I wanted you to know that I see you now. I see what your people did, and I'm trying to learn to care the way you care." Minjun smiled. "That's all we ever wanted, to be seen, and to help others learn to see each other." As he left the chambers that day, he thought about the journey that had brought them here, the decades of quiet service, the decision to leave, the fear that maybe they had been wrong, that maybe their work really didn't matter, and then the discovery that it mattered more than anyone had realized. They hadn't sought glory. They hadn't demanded recognition. They had simply stepped back and let the galaxy see what it looked like without them. And in doing so, they had taught the greatest lesson that any teacher can teach, that the quietest work is often the most essential, that care is not weakness, but strength. That civilization is built not just on grand achievements and dramatic victories, but on the daily choice to help someone, to listen to someone, to care about someone who needs it. As Minjun walked through the halls of the council building, he passed a newly installed memorial. It was a simple stone wall with the inscription in every council language. The words were attributed to a human philosopher from centuries ago, but they had never been more relevant. "They will know we were here by the care we showed, not the glory we claimed." Below it, someone had added a newer inscription, written after humanity's return. "They left silently. We learned loudly. Now we build together." Minjun smiled and headed home. There was work to do tomorrow, as there always was. But now, finally, that work was seen. That work was valued. And that made all the difference.